So I remember this time of year when I was a kid, growing up in my home parish, these Gospels always were very scary. And it still seems to be that way now. But I think we need to, well, as always, we need to deepen our understanding and our appreciation and our assimilation of the real message. Too often, I think and understandably, I guess, the imagery points in that direction. We interpret it primarily on an external sense. The sun will be, literally, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the powers of heaven will be shaken. And who knows, we know now that from modern astronomy that, in a couple of billion years, the sun will expand and burn up the whole earth, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. But I think we have a job to do long before that. In fact, if the earth even lasts that long, if we don't blow ourselves up or we don't destroy the planet or whatever in the meantime. But as always, the macrocosm is really a story about the microcosm, which is its deepest reflection. So we should really apply these images and these truths, these challenges to our inner life. When it says that the sun will no longer give its light, the moon, nor the moon, and the powers of heaven will be shaken, that should be an interior experience. And darkness comes to us interiorly in many ways and in many circumstances. Certainly everything from personal to familial distress or political upheaval or whatever it might be, that has definitely an inner dimension, which is its reflection and sometimes its cause, the cause of outward distress. But mystically speaking, it's something that has to happen. Has to happen all the time. Same thing with the imagery of death and resurrection, which is much more familiar to us from our Christian faith, that we're supposed to die and rise with Christ, and that's not just dying in baptism and rising with Him, or dying physically and then rising with Him on the last day. It should be a daily experience, moment by moment experience, where we die to our old way of being and thinking and feeling and acting, and rise to by the inspiration of the Spirit and Christ dwelling within us, rise to a new way of life, a life which is reflective of the gospel, which allows God's love and light and pardon and hope and compassion to pour into the world as it pours into us. You know the old expression, if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. If you die every day, your physical death will be a piece of cake. Relatively speaking, that we'll be ready to make the passage, even if it's painful physically or whatever. We'll be able to move into the newness of life because we've been doing it every day. We've had practice. Well, the same thing with the imagery of light. Our other lights have to go out. The sun and the moon have to go dark. Our usual human ways of knowing, however useful they might be, and they're not always useful, however useful they might be in a practical sense, they have to yield to a deeper wisdom, to a stronger light. The Beatitudes. We have to change our way of thinking, put on the new person and let the old one, your kingdom come, my kingdom go. So we have to have that new light coming into us all the time. I like the word partial in English because it's two-pronged. Partial in part. Partial, we've got partiality. In other words, it can be biased, but in any case, it's only in part. St. Paul says in the wonderful passage about love in 1 Corinthians 13, he says, we know in part, our prophecies are in part, we see in a mirror darkly. When the perfect comes, the imperfect, the partial, in both senses, will pass away. But we have to start now. Because in a sense, the perfect is already here. That's the whole point of the second reading today when it says these previous partial sacrifices yield to the one perfect sacrifice of Christ. And that has to be applied to us more and more richly every day. So that's why all the imagery of light, it says the Son of Man will come in the clouds of glory. Come in glory on the clouds of heaven. And stop looking up there. What about the clouds of heaven coming in glory in your own psyche, in your own mind, in your own heart? The imagery of the psalm comes up here, where it says, my heart rejoices, my flesh dwells secure, my whole being exults when we have the light of the Lord enter us. And that's our destiny, so we should get in practice now, so we're ready. That wonderful passage, from Daniel today, which says the Son of Man will come on the clouds of heaven, is what follows, and Jesus quotes that himself during his trial, as you know. But the beautiful image that we hear today is that, the just shall shine like the sun, like the glory of the firmament. And those who bring many to wisdom, to justice, to righteousness will be like the stars, shine like the stars of heaven. And Jesus himself says that in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13. He says, the just shall shine like the sun in the kingdom of the Father. Sun, S-U-N, S-O-N. It's all infinite light. Infinite light that we're called to get used to, get our spiritual eyes accustomed to. Or as St. Paul says provocatively to the Ephesians, have the eyes of your heart enlightened. So you can be filled with all the fullness of God, he says. That's a pretty big order. So if you're filled with divine light, infinite light, to be able to shine like the sun, well, let's start getting used to it. Let's examine all the other lights in our lives, all we've learned from business or family or culture or nation or sometimes even church. It's only partial, again, in both senses sometimes. All the biases we have, all the prejudices we have, all the blind spots that we have. If we hold on to those, we're not dying every day and we're not allowing Christ's light to come in and invade and take over and illumine and radiate. Infinite light, shining like the sun. We'll hardly recognize each other in heaven because we'll be shining like the sun, all together. The one sun, Jesus. So it's a good time, especially in these periods of turmoil in our own country and in our church and in the world, to say, what are my partial lights that I need to put out, or better, allowed to be overshadowed, overshone by the light of Christ and his Spirit, which is the light of love, of infinite love and compassion and pardon and hope, joy and mercy. Where am I partial? Where are my feeble eyes only seeing partially? In all levels, in every dimension of my life. So if we die every day with Christ, we'll rise with him, and if we go dark every day, if we enter the divine darkness, read my column in today's bulletin about that, read into the divine darkness and you will have divine eternal light as our spiritual eyes, the eyes of our heart, get used to it. So let's start getting used to it. Not only for the sake of our eternal destiny, but for the sake of the planet, for the sake of the church, for the sake of our families and country, for the sake of our life here now. Christ's light has come. And are we ready for it?